Reaction tonight to a recent fatal agricultural accident where two men died near Utica. They passed out while working around liquid manure. We learned how dangerous those gases are and what advice local experts have if someone is around a large quantity of liquid manure. Here's 7 News reporter Chad Charette.
Terrible thing that happened. Just no one wants that to happen on their farm or anything.
We all know that manure smells bad. Following last week's incident in central New York, Mike Hunter with Cornell Cooperative Extension reminds folks that smell can be fatal in an enclosed space.
Unfortunately, we get a lot of situations where not only is it just one fatality in these manure storage incidences, it can be multiple.
On Thursday in Clinton, New York, 29-year-old Tyler Memory and 33-year-old Nate Dottie were found unconscious after falling into a tanker much like this one. They were later pronounced dead. Hunter, who also serves as Plessis fire chief, says the culprit was likely hydrogen sulfide, a highly toxic gas released by manure.
And once levels approach 600 plus parts per million, loss of consciousness and death is within minutes.
If you see anyone fall into a manure tank, Hunter's main tip is to call 911, since there's no way to safely retrieve them without a breathing apparatus.
It's really hard to see that and to walk away and know that we just have to call 911.
In addition to increased training, Hunter recommends using single gas meters like the one I'm wearing. It's a simple device that can detect individual gases like hydrogen sulfide and warn its wearer of high concentrations.
There's probably not many farms that equip their workers with those, but it's a good thing to have because really to do that or to work around those, we have to measure that. Gas.
For those interested in learning more about manure safety, the North American Manure Expo will be held next month in Auburn, New York. Chad Charette, 7 News.